The smell hit Corvin before anything else, sulfur and wet ash, and something older than both, like iron left in rain. He had smelled it twice before in his life. Once at 18, standing behind a shield wall while a dragon passed overhead, and the man beside him wet himself without shame. And once at 30, pulling his injured leg out of a ditch at the edge of a battlefield, when a dying dragon had breathed its last 30 paces away, and the air had tasted like the end of something permanent. He was 42 now, and the smell was coming from the ashen wood, and he followed it anyway. He found her in a clearing that had not existed yesterday. The trees around it were black and leafless, bent outward like they had been pushed by something enormous. She was grey-green and medium-sized, which meant she was young by dragon standards, probably no older than 70 years. Her wings were folded against her body. Her neck was extended flat across the ground, the way exhausted animals lay down. She was not sleeping. She was curled around something. Even dead, she had not let go. Corvin stood at the clearing's edge for a long time. His left leg ached the way it always ached in cold weather, a deep grinding pain that lived below the knee and never fully left. He leaned on his walking staff and looked at the dragon and the burned clearing and the 3 eggs she had died protecting. 2 were cracked open already. Whatever had been inside them had not survived the cold. The 3rd was whole, and it was moving. He did not think about the purge decree. He did not think about the 3 silver marks per egg that the dragonwood paid to informants. He did not think about what happened to villages that were found harboring dragons, and he knew what happened, because he had been part of the column that burned 12 years ago, and he had not slept clean since. He picked up the egg. It was warm. Something inside it pushed back against his palms. He walked home. His hut was 2 rooms of stone at the edge of the ashenwood. He had a hearth, a cot, a shelf of dried herbs he sold in bundles to the apothecary in Dunreach, and a locked chest under his bed that he had not opened in years. He built the fire higher than he could afford and set the egg beside it, packed in old wool, and sat down on the floor next to it because he was too tired to get up and too awake to sleep. The egg hatched an hour before dawn. She came out pale grey, the color of river stone after long rain. She was the size of a large cat, dripping, furious at the cold, and completely silent. She did not make the noise he expected. She just looked at him with amber eyes that were far too steady for something that had been alive for 10 minutes. He held out his hand. She bit it, not hard enough to break the skin, more like a test. He said quietly, "I know, I know." She looked at him for a while longer. Then she walked to the fire, circled it twice, and lay down. He named her Sen. In the morning, he went back to the clearing. He did not know why. He told himself it was to confirm the other eggs were truly cold. They were. But on the ground beside the mother's body, half buried under ash and pine needles, he found one more egg he had missed, smaller than the others, hidden beneath her shoulder where her body had shifted in death. This one was also moving. He brought it home. It hatched in the afternoon. This one was dark-scaled, nearly black, and came out fighting, scratched his arm in 3 places before he got it wrapped in cloth, bit him twice more when he tried to check its wings. When he finally set it down, it went directly to Sen and pressed itself against her side and glared at Corvin like he had personally caused all its problems. He named it Bosk. He did not know yet if Bosk was male or female. Bosk did not seem to consider this Corvin's business. 3 days passed. He fed them scraps of meat, kept the fire burning, slept when they slept, which was often. His leg hurt less than usual, which he did not understand and did not examine. He had stopped going to Dunreach. He had stopped doing much of anything except watching 2 small creatures who had no reason to be alive move around his 2-room hut like they owned it. On the 4th morning, he woke to find Sen sitting on his chest, watching his face. She had climbed up onto the cot sometime in the night. She was studying him with the focused attention of someone reading a difficult map. He said, "What?" She said nothing. She was 4 days old, but she tilted her head the way he had seen her tilt it at the fire and at the walls and at the locked chest under the bed, like she was deciding what something was made of and whether it would hold. He had the strange feeling that he had just passed some kind of test. Outside, somewhere in the grey morning, a dragonwood patrol horn sounded from the direction of the Dunreach Road. Long, too short, standard sweep call, looking for something. Bosk, without opening his eyes, went flat and completely still. Corvin put his hand over the fire and snuffed it. The horn did not come closer. After a long while it moved south toward the river. He breathed again. He looked at Sen still sitting on his chest, and Bosk flat on the floor, and the cold hearth, and the locked chest, and the life he had built here that was now something entirely different from what it had been a week ago. He did not regret it. That was the strangest part. He did not regret it at all. 4 months in, Bosk figured out fire. He did it by accident, sneezing while angry, which was his most natural state, and set Corvin's herb shelf alight at 3 in the morning. Corvin put it out with a pot of water. Bosk watched the whole thing with what Corvin had come to recognize as guilt, which on a dark-scaled dragon looked exactly the same as fury, but with less eye contact. Sen observed the incident from the windowsill, decided it was beneath commentary, and went back to sleep. They were dog-sized now, in 4 months. Corvin had not expected that. He had thought dragons grew slowly, the way old stories described, decades to reach full size, centuries to grow wise. But whatever old stories existed about dragon hatchlings had clearly been written by people who had never actually raised one, because these two ate constantly, grew fast, and were capable of destruction on a scale that exceeded their body size in ways that should not have been physically possible. Bosk had demolished the back wall shelf. Sen had, with great patience and apparent intellectual satisfaction, figured out how to unlock the chest under the bed. She had not broken the lock. She had somehow understood the mechanism and worked it open with her claws, and when Corvin discovered this, he had found her sitting inside the open chest, surrounded by his old letters and military papers, looking at each one in turn. He sat down on the floor across from her. She looked at him, then she looked at one of the letters, then back at him. He said, "You can't read those." She looked at the letter again, deliberately. He said, "Can you?" She looked at him. He had the distinct impression she was waiting for him to be smarter. He began reading them to her in the evenings. Old dispatch orders, a deed to land his father had left him that the crown had seized when he refused to re-enlist. 3 letters from a woman in the East that he had never answered and still did not know why. He read them out loud in the firelight, and Sen sat across from him, and Bosk lay behind him with his chin on Corvin's lower back, which was Bosk's way of being present without admitting he was listening. The patrol came twice more. Both times Nil's early warning system saved them. Nil was what Corvin called the third one, the small dark grey one that he found on the 6th week, already hatched and hiding inside his rain barrel. He had no idea where it had come from. He had not seen a third egg. His best guess was that it had rolled under the dead mother's body and he had missed it, and it had somehow, improbably, impossibly, survived nearly 6 weeks of cold and exposure and had found his hut by following the warmth of the chimney smoke. Nil was half the size of the other 2. Its scales were a dark grey that shaded to near black at the spine. It barely ate. It pressed flat whenever it heard anything, but it pressed flat several minutes before anyone else could hear anything, and that had saved all of them twice now when the dragonwood horn had sounded on the Dunreach Road. Corvin did not know what to make of Nil. He had the feeling Nil did not know what to make of Nil either. The trouble arrived not as soldiers, but as a girl named Pella. She was 15, the daughter of the widow who ran the smokehouse on the edge of Dunreach. She had been bringing Corvin his weekly supply of salted meat for 2 years because her mother's knees were bad and Corvin tipped fairly. She knocked on the door on a grey Tuesday, and when Corvin opened it, she looked past him into the room and said, "There are 3 of them." Corvin said, "You did not see that." Pella said, "One of them is sitting on your table eating your lunch." Bosk, who was indeed sitting on the table eating Corvin's lunch, turned and looked at Pella with what appeared to be complete indifference. Sen dropped from the ceiling beam she had been sleeping on, landed silently on the floor between Corvin and Pella, and sat. She did not make a sound. She looked at Pella the same way she looked at everything, like she was deciding if it would hold. Pella looked down at Sen. Sen looked up at Pella. Pella crouched down to Sen's level. She said, "Hello." Sen said nothing. She was 4 months old, but she lowered her head just slightly in a gesture Corvin had never seen her make before. Pella looked up at Corvin. "I'm not going to say anything." Corvin said, "You understand what happens to people who—" "I understand," Pella said. "I also understand my mother's smokehouse has been short on customers since the Dragonwood garrison moved into Dunreach and started asking questions at every door. If the people I actually like are in trouble, I want to know." She stayed for 2 hours. She played with Bosk, who played back with a level of enthusiasm that destroyed one chair. She listened to Sen. She sat with Nil in the corner and talked to him quietly for a long while, and Nil, who had never chosen to sit close to any human except Corvin, stayed. When she left, she said, "I'll bring extra meat next week." Corvin stood in the doorway after she was gone and looked at the broken chair and the 3 dragons and the life that kept growing around him in directions he had never planned. He thought, "This is getting impossible to hide." He thought, "I am not going to stop." Outside, Nil pressed flat, distant hoofbeats on the Dunreach road, moving south, not turning. "Not yet." Nil went flat at dawn and did not get up. That was the only warning Corvin had. He had learned in 6 months to trust it completely. He was on his feet before he was fully awake, pulling on his coat, already moving. He put the fire out with dirt from the bucket he kept beside the hearth for exactly this. He pressed his hand signal to Sen, 2 fingers down, then open, the one that meant go out the back and go high and stay quiet. She woke Bosk with a bite to the ear, and they were through the back shutter before Corvin reached the front door. He opened it a crack. 10 riders, Dragonwood black and gold, and at the front, a man he did not recognize, not a captain's badge, something higher, an inquisitor's cord at the collar, white and gold. Behind them, 2 men carrying equipment that Corvin recognized from the war, dragon lances, purpose-built, not for fighting, for killing. They were not doing a sweep, they knew. Nil was already at Corvin's ankle. Corvin picked him up and put him inside his coat against his chest and buttoned it. Nil pressed flat there, hidden, not making a sound. Corvin went out the back. He did not run. He could not run. His leg had never allowed that, not since the border war left it grinding wrong. But he moved with the particular efficiency of a man who had spent 12 years walking this forest before sunrise, who knew which ground was soft and which held firm, which paths looked clear and were not, which were invisible to anyone without local knowledge. The patrol entered the hut. He heard them. He was already 50 yards into the trees. Bosk nearly ruined it. Bosk, somewhere above in the low cloud, let out a sound, not fire, just a sound, short and hard, the one he made when he was frightened. The patrol heard it. Corvin heard them hear it. Hoofbeats changed rhythm, moving toward the trees. Then Sen did something. She appeared at the far north end of the clearing, fully visible, and simply flew. Steady, deliberate, heading northeast away from Corvin's direction. The patrol saw her immediately. The Inquisitor shouted. Most of the riders turned north. She led them for 2 hours. He found out later from Pella. Sen had stayed just visible enough to keep them following, just ahead enough that they never caught her, and then gone high into cloud cover over the Ashenwood and disappeared. She reappeared at a hunter's shelter in the foothills 3 hours later, alone, entirely unbothered, and waited for Corvin and Nil to arrive on foot. Bosk arrived an hour after that, landed badly, favored his left wing, and refused to discuss it. The hut was searched but not burned. The Inquisitor believed they had fled and would be tracked. That was the report, Pella told him, when she reached the shelter 2 days later. She had walked there in the dark, carrying a pack of salted meat, her mother's good wool blanket, and a folded piece of paper. The paper was a notice posted in Dunreach. It named Corvin by name. It called him a traitor to the crown and an enemy of the purge. It offered 15 silver marks for information on his location. 15 silver marks was more than most families in Dunreach earned in a season. Corvin read it once. He folded it and put it in his coat pocket, next to where Nil had been pressed against his chest for hours and did not speak for a while. Pella said, no one in the market said anything when the post went up. My mother looked at it for a long time and then walked away. He looked at her. Your mother knows. She figured it out when I started buying twice the usual meat. Pella set the pack down. She said if they ask, she sold to a traveler and doesn't remember his face. He sat down on the floor of the shelter. Sen climbed into his lap, which she had never done before in her life. She was not that kind of dragon. She was the kind of dragon who observed from distances and made you feel judged. But she climbed into his lap and put her head against his chest, and her amber eyes went half closed. He said very quietly, I got you into this. She looked up at him. He said, all of you, I took you out of that forest and now. Bosk made a sound, sharp, dismissive. He did not look up from where he was lying, tending to his wing. Sen's eyes went fully closed. Nil crawled out from under the wool blanket and sat on Corvin's boot and went flat, not because of danger this time, just because that was where he sat. Corvin looked at the ceiling of the shelter. He thought about 15 silver marks. He thought about the widow in the smokehouse who had decided his face was forgettable. He thought about Sen flying across a clearing so that a patrol would follow her instead of him. He thought no one told any of them to do that. He said to Pella, we can't go back. She said, I know, I found something though. She pulled a second piece of paper from inside her coat, an old map, hand-drawn, the ink faded. My grandfather was a surveyor before the Crown dissolved the charter. He mapped this whole region. She spread it on the floor. There's an old way station in the Greyspine foothills. It's not on any official map. It's not in any Dragonwood record. My grandfather built it. Corvin looked at the map. He looked at the 3 dragons. He looked at Pella, who was 15 years old and had walked through the dark to bring him food and a way forward. He said, you should go home. She said, I will, tomorrow. Tonight I'm making sure you know the route. She was already tracing it with her finger. The way station was real, and it was better than Corvin expected, and worse than he hoped. Solid stone walls, a roof that mostly held, a hearth that drew clean, and no way to keep 3 growing dragons hidden if anyone came within a quarter-mile of it. But no one came. Through the rest of winter and into early spring, no one came. It was the first time in months that Corvin had slept without listening for hoofbeats. Sen used the time to start talking. Not words at first, sounds that carried clear intent, a low specific tone when she was watching something she had questions about, a different tone when she had reached a conclusion about it. Then, one morning in late winter, she looked at Corvin across the cold room and said, why? One word, rough and strange-shaped in a human throat not built for it, but unmistakable. Corvin looked up from his knife sharpening. He said, why what? She looked at the room, at the stone walls, at the hiding, at all of it. He understood. He set the knife down. He said, because your mother was curled around you when she was dead. She was still holding on, and I could not walk away from that. Sen was quiet. Then she is dead. Yes, but we are not. No. She processed this for a long time. Then she went back to whatever she had been looking at, and the conversation was over, and Corvin had the distinct feeling that he had just been asked the exact right question and had given the only answer that had ever been true. Bosk did not talk. Bosk communicated in fire intensity, wing position, and the angle of his glare. He had a precise and readable vocabulary in all 3 and had no interest in words, but something changed in him that winter. The aggression shifted into something else, something with more structure to it. He began to patrol, not because Corvin asked, but because he decided the way station needed it, and he decided it with the same unilateral certainty he decided everything. He flew the perimeter at dawn and dusk, high enough to be unseen, and came back with information. Distant smoke to the south, a hunter's camp that moved east and then left, a Dragonwood patrol that passed 3 miles away on the main road and did not turn. Corvin started keeping notes. He had not kept notes since the military, old habit from his time in the Signal Corps before the injury. He wrote down what Bosk reported. He wrote down Nil's warning patterns. He wrote down what Sen said, the few words at a time. He was building a picture without quite meaning to, a map of who they were and what they could do and what that might mean. Nil, he had concluded, could sense presence at range, not magically, not mystically, like a deep sensitivity to vibration and sound and change in air pressure that the rest of them did not have. He had felt the Dragonwood patrol 3 days ago before Bosk saw them. He had gone flat and the others had stilled, and when Corvin looked to Nil for direction, Nil had tilted his head south-southwest with such clarity of intention that it felt like a compass reading. Nil was still the smallest. He was still the one who hid first and never breathed fire. He had been the one Corvin spent a whole night over, newborn, not sure he would make it to morning. And he was the one who kept them alive, quietly, every time. Pella came back in early spring. She had found the way station by memory of the map and arrived at dusk looking like someone who had been walking for 2 days, which she had. She sat down without being asked, drank water and said, "The Inquisitor is gone. He was recalled south, but the garrison commander Holt, he's still asking. He's different from the Inquisitor. The Inquisitor was looking for a criminal. Holt is looking for something else. I don't know what." Corvin thought about the patrol horn he had heard 6 months ago, moving south when it could have moved toward him. He thought about the timing of it. He said, "What do people in Dunreach say about Holt?" Pella said that he doesn't threaten anyone, that he asks questions and listens to the answers, that he paid for the miller's daughter's medicine when she was sick and the family couldn't afford it. She paused. "My mother says he came into the smokehouse and asked if she knew you, and when she said no, he thanked her for her time and bought a side of cured pork at full price." Corvin sat with that. Bosk came in from his evening patrol. He landed on the stone floor, looked at Pella with the tolerant contempt he extended to all humans who were not Corvin, and went to the corner. Then, with enormous reluctance, he came back and dropped something at Pella's feet, a rabbit, freshly caught. Pella stared at it, then at Bosk. Bosk had already turned away. Corvin said, "He does that, don't read too much into it." Pella picked up the rabbit. She said, "He's never done that before." "No," Corvin said, "he hasn't." He looked at Bosk in the corner, wings folded, pointedly examining the wall. Sen said from the ceiling beam, "He likes her." Bosk's tail moved once, hard, against the stone floor. No one said anything else about it. That night Corvin lay on his cot and looked at the ceiling and thought about Holt, a garrison commander who moved south when he could have moved north, who bought pork from a widow at full price, who asked questions and listened. He thought about what kind of man does that in the middle of a purge campaign. He thought, a man who is not sure the campaign is right. He thought, I may need to talk to that man. He did not know yet how, he did not know yet when, but the thought had arrived and it stayed. Corvin walked into Dunreach on a Tuesday morning and sat down across from Garrison Commander Holt at the man's own table in the garrison's mess hall and said, "I need to show you something." He put a letter on the table, then a second one, then a third. Holt did not call for his soldiers. He looked at Corvin for a moment with the flat, reading expression of a man who spent his life weighing people quickly. Then he looked at the letters. They were old, water-stained, written in a hand that no one who had not seen pre-purge administrative correspondence would recognize. Corvin had found them years ago in the chest he had kept locked under his bed for over a decade, papers from a dead officer, a man named Doven, who had been Corvin's commander in the border war and had been killed by his own side not long after the war ended. Corvin had never understood why, at 22, he understood now. The letters were from a crown minister to a Dragonwood colonel, 30 years old. They described the original purge decree not as a response to dragon attacks. There had been no attacks in the 5 years prior. The letters confirmed this in passing, taking it for granted, but as a necessary step in consolidating the northern landholdings. The dragons in the Ashenwood region had treaty claim to the mountain passes. As long as they existed, the noble families controlling those passes could not claim them outright. The purge had not been protection. It had been land seizure by other means. Holt read all 3 letters without speaking. Then he set them down and looked at the wall for a while. Corvin waited. He was very good at waiting. He had learned it from Sen. Holt said, "Where did you get these?" Corvin told him about the officer, about the chest, about carrying those letters for 20 years without fully reading them because he had not wanted to know what they said. Holt said, "You walked in here, into this garrison, alone, with a 15 silver bounty on your head." Corvin said, "Yes." Holt said, "That is either very brave or very stupid." Corvin said, "I've been told it's usually both with me." Holt was not a man who smiled easily, but something in his face shifted slightly. He looked at the letters again. "Are they alive, the 3 dragons?" Corvin said, "Yes." Holt said, "Has any person been harmed by them? Any village, any farm?" Corvin said, "No." Holt said, "Has any person been helped by them?" Corvin thought about Pella arriving at the way station at dusk, Bosk dropping a rabbit at her feet with his back turned. He thought about Sen's voice in the dark telling him, "We are not dead." He thought about Nil pressed flat on his chest for 3 hours in the cold while the patrol moved south. He said, "Yes." Holt was quiet for a long time. Then he stood up, went to the door, told the duty soldier outside to take his lunch, waited until the man's footsteps receded, sat back down. He said, "I'm going to tell you something. The Inquisitor who was here in winter, he filed a report before he left. It named 3 dragons as confirmed threats requiring elimination. It also named you as a collaborator. That report is in the capital now. Someone will act on it. I have maybe 30 days before someone arrives who I cannot redirect." Corvin said, "What are you telling me?" Holt said, "I'm telling you that those 30 days exist. What you do with them is not something I'm going to know about." He picked up the letters and held them out. "I would like to keep these for my personal records." Corvin looked at him. Holt said, "I know 3 scribes in the capital who believe historical documents should be available to the public record. I know a Chronicler's Guild advocate who has spent 7 years trying to challenge the Purge Decree's legal basis and has not had enough evidence to push it to the High Council." He paused. "Letters signed by a Crown Minister are evidence." Corvin left the letters on the table. He stood. He picked up his walking staff. He said, "You could have caught me 6 months ago on the Dunreach Road. I heard your horn. You moved south." Holt said nothing. Corvin said, "Why?" Holt looked at the wall. He said, "Because I have followed orders my whole life, and I have watched what those orders built, and I wanted to know what you were before I decided." He paused. "Now I know." Corvin walked out of the garrison. He walked through Dunreach without hurrying. He passed the smokehouse. Through the window he could see Pella's mother behind the counter. She did not look up as he passed, but she moved something on the counter, a small clay jar, shifting it to the left. The signal she and Pella had agreed, all clear. He reached the road north and began walking. His leg ached, the spring mud was soft, and his staff sank on every 3rd step. It was a long walk back to the way station, and he would not make it before dark. He did not mind. He had been walking through difficult country for a long time. When he was 2 miles into the Ashenwood, Nil landed on his shoulder. He had no idea how long Nil had been following above the tree line, but the weight and warmth of the small grey dragon against his neck was so normal by now that he had stopped being surprised by it. He said, "We have 30 days. Nil made a sound, quiet, specific, the one that meant, "I heard you, I understand." Corvin kept walking. Above him, through the trees, he heard the sweep of wider wings, Bosk and Sen circling high, keeping the sky. He thought, 30 days is enough. He thought, I have done more with less. The hearing happened in a room Corvin was not allowed to enter. He sat outside it on a stone bench in the Valdenmoor High Council building, a building he had never been inside before, a building he had always assumed was for people whose names meant something, and he waited. Nil was inside his coat. Bosk and Sen were in the care of a Chronicler's Guild advocate named Ferris, who had specifically requested to meet them before the hearing and had spent 2 hours afterward writing in a notebook and saying very little to anyone. Pella was beside him on the bench. She had not asked permission to come to the capital. She had simply been there when the cart left, sitting in the back with Nil on her lap. They had been waiting for 4 hours. The letters had done what Holt said they would do. Ferris had taken them to the council with the Dragonwood Patrol reports attached, the ones that showed no dragon attacks in the Ashenwood region in 17 years. The ones that showed the only fires attributed to dragons in that time period had been in areas where the Dragonwood itself had conducted operations. Someone inside the council had apparently been waiting for exactly this kind of evidence for a long time, because within 2 weeks of Holt delivering the letters, the hearing had been called. Holt had been suspended from duty pending an internal inquiry into his conduct. He had submitted the letters to the Chroniclers Guild before his suspension was processed, which meant the inquiry could not suppress them. The man was careful. Corvin had come to respect that deeply. The doors opened. Ferris came out. He was a thin, quiet man who moved as if he was always conserving energy for something important. He sat down next to Corvin and looked at his notebook for a moment. He said, "The purge decree has been suspended pending a full historical review. Not repealed, suspended. That distinction matters. It means the review must be completed and the results published before any enforcement can resume. Given the nature of the letters and what they establish about the decree's original intent, the likelihood that the review results in full repeal is," he paused, weighing his words, "significant." Corvin said, "And the 3 of them?" Ferris said, "The kill order has been withdrawn. The criminal charge against you has been reclassified to civil violation. You are required to register the dragons with the Chroniclers Guild as documented surviving members of the Ashenwood Treaty clans, which gives them protected status under old Alliance law that technically was never voided. It was simply not enforced." He paused again. "Lady Orvain, who signed the original kill order against you, has been removed from her advisory position. She is not being prosecuted. That is a separate fight and one I intend to have." Pella said, "So they're safe." Ferris said, "For now, the world does not change all at once, but the legal ground has shifted and it will not shift back, not with the evidence in public record." Corvin sat with that. He thought about a burned clearing in the Ashenwood, a grey-green dragon curled around her eggs in death. He thought about 3 silver marks per egg and what he had chosen instead. He thought about a locked chest he had carried for 20 years without opening and what had been inside it all along. He thought, "Darvin, you should have lived to see this." Pella said, "What happens now?" Ferris said, "You go home." She said, "We don't have a home." Ferris said, "The way station is legally registered as a way station, which means it falls under the Historic Preservation Charter. No Crown authority can remove occupants of a preserved historic site without Chroniclers Guild sign-off." He almost smiled. "Sign-off I have no intention of providing." They went back to the way station. All of them, Corvin, Pella, Ferris, and the 3 dragons who had traveled to the capital in a covered cart and had spent the journey being calm about it in a way that had clearly unsettled every person who opened the cart to check the cargo. The way station looked the same. Stone walls, a roof that mostly held, a hearth that drew clean. Bosk landed on top of it immediately and resumed his patrol like he had simply been away for a while on unrelated business. Sen went inside and climbed the ceiling beam and looked at everyone below with amber eyes. Nil pressed flat in the corner for exactly 3 minutes, determined no danger, and went to sleep on Pella's boot. Corvin sat in the doorway with his bad leg stretched out. Ferris sat beside him. The man said, "I want to ask you something. The council asked me today what gave you the confidence to walk into that garrison alone, what you were counting on." He paused. "I did not know the answer. What was it?" Corvin thought about it. He said, "A man who buys pork at full price from a widow when he does not have to, a girl who walks through the dark with a map she memorized, a widow who decides she does not remember faces." He looked out at the tree line. "I was counting on people. I have always found that people, when you actually look at them, are better than the systems that tell them who to be." Ferris wrote something in his notebook. Inside the way station, Sen said clearly, calmly, in her rough human-shaped words, "Corvin, food." Pella laughed. Bosk from the roof, made a sound that on any other creature would have been called laughter, but which Corvin chose to classify as a tactical sound of undetermined purpose, for Bosk's dignity. Nil did not make a sound, he was already asleep. Corvin got up, his leg ached, the evening was cold, there was still a historical review to complete, still a woman who had signed a kill order and walked free, still a world that had not yet decided what it thought about dragons sharing it with humans. He went inside and made dinner. That was enough, that was, for now, exactly enough.